Forgive me, Madam Speaker Pro Tem. What's happening, we're going to do something really daring tonight, and we'll see if it actually works. We're going to actually use some boards, some math, that I haven't even actually seen the final numbers on. We were working on them actually over the weekend in regards to President Biden's State of the Union, and then with them dropping their budget. And we're trying to make the math work, which seems to be the routine here. So I have a lot of boards. The theme is actually really simple on a couple conceptual levels. Okay, so the president basically said, hey, the Medicare Trust Fund, we're going to do something about it. Great. 7 years or so from now, the Medicare Trust Fund is emptied. But the Medicare Trust Fund is really, we often refer to it as the Part A, there's actually a couple slivers of it, is about a third. It's just the hospital portion. The rest comes out of the general fund. But did you notice how the president stood right there, basically said, you're not allowed to talk about Social Security, you're not allowed to talk about reforming it, you're not allowed to talk about the fact that in 8 or 9 years it's gone, and the amount of that dwarfs dramatically the scale of the shortfall of Medicare. But understand, you got the Transportation Trust Fund, it's going empty. You got the Medicare Part A, and then the big kahuna is Social Security, and those all happen within the next 9 years. And the intense frustration of the president's speech is, once again, it was a campaign speech, and it got to talk to the voters out there. Are you for sale? Because you were promised lots of things with your own money. So here's the reality. We're going to borrow the money, or we're going to raise the taxes. I'm going to show you the tax calculations are a complete fraud. We're going to buy your votes with your own money, and then we're going to borrow a boatload of the spending that's going to crush your retirement and crush your kids and your grandkids. Yay, go America. All right. Once again, we're back to sort of setting records. If you actually subscribe to my daily debt, we send out a text message every single day with what's going on. And we don't make, it's not our opinion, it's right off the Treasury's website. We just grab it and we give you the two numbers so you actually understand it. We say, hey, for this fiscal year, because remember, we play some games at the end of the fiscal year on the timing effect where, like they did last year, where they rolled back the money from the Supreme Court ruling in regards to student loans, but they rolled it back in to push down the total number because they had done it up the previous fiscal year. There's all sorts of games. But we also give you one which it's just a running clock. It's the 365, this year, 366-day clock, and it just runs, and you get to see both of them. And right now, if you tell the truth and use the gross number, because we pay interest to the trust funds, and we're functionally the only industrialized country in the world that lies on this, where we borrow our own money, we pay it interest, and then we pretend, well, that's off the books. It's why if you look at OECD, they actually have the United States now closer to 144% of debt to GDP, because they don't allow accounting games like we do internally. We're borrowing over $95,000 a second. If you actually look at the run rate right now, last 365 days, or 366 if you throw in the leap year, we've borrowed over $3 trillion. I'm trying to find a nice way to emphasize that word. $3 trillion in the running last year. And I think I have it in one of my charts here, but if I don't, I'll just say it right now. When the president published their budget, is anyone paying attention how the game is working? We're starting to understand the game. So several months ago, when the preliminary budget numbers were put out by the White House, hey, we're going to borrow $1.5 trillion, 1.6. Wink, wink, nod, nod. The number came out, what was it, yesterday? Earlier today. Says, well, it looks like we're closer to 2.1, 2.2. But if you then look at the rest of their math, it's going up higher than that. It looks like actually if you actually do the gross, it really is going over the $2,800,000,000,000. Do we do this to lie to the bond markets or each other, or is it just so the idiot class, in Washington basically quotes the old number? But does anyone understand when you see movements of numbers that are functionally $1 trillion? The burn rate right now is we're borrowing $1 trillion about every 125 days. Does that get anyone's attention? So we're going to walk through a number of these slides, and then when we get down to the end here, forgive me for moving these, we're going to actually do some slides trying to take a look at the president's budget they dropped just a few hours ago and our base math. So I'm going to run through many of these really quickly because there was a number of things said during the President's State of the Union address that were just bizarre. They're urban folk legend, but as we've seen in this town, if you say a lie enough times, it starts to become baseline political discussion. What happened after the TCJA? That's the tax reform that happened in December 2017. And there's two reasons for doing this. I want to show that the vast majority of where the tax cuts were for the working middle class, and that the U.S. tax code got more progressive. The wealthy, the top tiers, actually couple tiers in the United States of income, today pay a higher percentage of the federal income tax than they did before 2017. And I probably should say this now so I don't forget it. I believe there's a scam. So often we go home and we have people that they meet you at, you're at the grocery store, you're at Walmart, Costco, whatever. Someone comes up to you and they have the latest conspiracy theory. Or the number of times these things are just filled with them. I'll give you one that's not a conspiracy theory, it's math. If you take the president's speech and say, we're going to tax rich people. Remember, I've come to this floor multiple times and shown you what happens when you do tax maximization of those over $400,000, and you can't even close anything close. You get about 1.5% of GDP. This year, we're basically borrowing, 9.6% of the GDP? Does anyone do some basic math, see the difference? We got a problem. But it's great political rhetoric, both on the right and the left, because, we're a populist country now. Tax the rich people. Great. Doesn't get you anywhere near where you need to be. So when we get near the end of this decade, Social Security trust fund's empty, Transportation trust fund's empty. If the president got his way, we've tax maximized just to cover the shortfall in the Medicare trust fund. Where do you get the money? I will lay a marker down today. By the end of this decade, this country will have a VAT tax, a value-added tax, just like the rest of the industrialized world, just like Europe, just like everyone else. And at that moment, the working middle class, that hardworking middle class, will be poor. And that's the scam that's going on, because that's where the money is. And so you have this dancing, and it works politically. Think about this. As the wealthier and better educated have moved more to the Democrat Party, working people have moved to the Republican Party. Depending on who's in power at the end of this decade, be prepared. If you don't make some of these policy changes that change the cost of health care, there's no mathematical way you make it out of this decade without kicking the working class in the heads. And that's what's going on. So let's walk through some of this. Okay. So over here, you got to understand one of the key things that happened when we did tax reform. You functionally took half of the society, half the working people in this country. Now they're poor working people, understand, but half of them pay almost no income taxes. Okay? But you get over here to that top 1%, and yeah, they had a huge tax cut. They went from 26.8 to 25.6. But we also removed a whole bunch of other deductions, and we're going to talk about that. So it's always amusing here when you have our brothers and sisters from high tax states saying, we want SALT, because it goes mostly to really rich people, and they write us checks. So we're going to blaze through these because we got a lot to do tonight. Did this last week, want to make the point, this number is now wrong. Our estimate is we're going to have interest this year, this fiscal year, of $1.1 trillion. $1.1 trillion of interest in the 2024 fiscal year means Social Security is number one spend at $1.45 trillion. Interest will be number two. Medicare will be number three. Defense is now number four. You all heard that in the president's speech, right? And I keep trying to make the point over and over and over that it's not just those of us who think it's more ethical to do gross interest. If you even do net interest. Now, that means you pretend you didn't pay any interest to Social Security Trust Fund, Medicare Trust Fund, Transportation Trust Fund, Railroad Retirement Trust Fund, all the others. You just say, you borrowed the money, you didn't pay anything. We're just going to keep that off the books. Just the interest you pay out to those people who bought U.S. debt, bonds, T-bills, notes. That's still the second highest spend. But that would be inconvenient to go out and tell the truth, wouldn't it? So, I'm laying myself on the line. I believe if you look at the trend line, even from the budget office at the White House, the amount they have keep revising the number, there's a very good chance total gross debt, borrowing this year, 2.8 trillion, it could actually kiss up to 3. Now, why is this such a big deal? Think about it. Why is this such a big deal? Didn't we just have a gentleman standing behind that microphone telling us how great the economy was? How great all the spending was? How much it had moved the economy? Okay, GDP is actually reasonable. It's actually pretty good right now. How is it possible? You're running a $3 trillion deficit in a time when the economy is supposedly doing well. Do you understand? These are deficits that would have been in the middle of the pandemic. The wheels have come off, and this place isn't willing to actually deal with the reality. When we can't even do a deficit commission, when we sit here and fight for months over things that would be rounding errors, really uncomfortable to say, if you're borrowing like $9 billion a day and we're going to shut the place down for months over $16 billion, does anyone see a math problem? We basically burnt this place down for a couple days of interest, borrowing. So let's actually walk through what's about to happen to each of you. We use 2026 because that's the year you're going to pay your taxes. Next year, a number of the provisions of the tax reform from December 2017 expire. You got it? So let's walk through. Let's say you are a middle American. You're basically working your sides off. You right now you have a 24% tax rate. Okay, congratulations, you go up to 28. If you're one of those top earners, you now have functionally a 37% tax rate. You're going to 39.6. All the marginal tax rates go up, and that happens next year. So at the moment this election is over, the negotiations begin on this, and it will matter who's in the Senate Finance, who's in the House Ways and Means Committee, because the math takes off. So let's actually go a little bit further. Expiring 2025 tax provisions. Standard deduction. If you are single, you get a $14,600 deduction. That goes away next year. And that standard deduction goes to $8,300. Anyone see a problem? Married, you get a $29,200 deduction today. A year from now, that's gone. You go to $16,600. Sure glad the president spent a bunch of time talking about how we were going to protect the middle class and make the economy continue to grow. So just a baseline, the baseline number, And this is already the law. You're a single individual, you make $60,000. You will pay $1,794 more. $1,794 at the end of next year. That's the law. It's already baseline. So you understand the crazy amount of spending it was talked about behind that microphone last week. They're already relying on your taxes going up. So let's walk through a couple other things so people understand. Expiring 2025 tax provisions, pass-throughs. Any of you have an LLC? You know, a family business, a side hustle? You have a little LLC, you make some income? You do some consulting. Maybe you're a fancy subchapter S corporation. Maybe you're a partnership. Maybe you're one of those employee-owned type businesses. You understand current status. You get to deduct equal to 20%. Yeah, that was trying to find a way to make it equal so you had the same fairness for subchapter C corporations or chapter C corporations. That's gone. Your taxes are going up a whole bunch if you're an LLC or a pass-through. Employer credit for paid leave goes away next year. Just goes away. Right now, credit up to 25% for up to 12 weeks. You get a 25% credit. That was one of the incentives that was built into the 2017 tax reform. It expires, it goes away. I'm sure glad this place is stepping up and understanding the expiring provisions and the kick in the head that will be to the working class because we're making the numbers work, right? All right, another one. Expiring 2025 provisions, state and local tax deductions. Now, those of you from high-tax states, you're giddy. The deduction right now is capped at $10,000. And it goes back to as high as you want. The great irony here is when you have the Bernie Sanders of the world who basically say, this is a tax cut, tax deduction for the ultra-wealthy. Because almost the vast majority, years ago I came back and did the charts on this, and it was somewhere in the 80, almost 90+% went to really the top 1 or 2% of income earners. Watch how many of our friends on the left, our Democrat colleagues, fight like crazy for this, even though it's a complete violation of every principle they claim, except it happens to be their constituents and their contributors. All right, let's have a little more darkness here. Expiring 2025 tax provision, child tax credit, and credit for other dependents. Right now, you get a couple $1,000s. And it phases out when you get around that $400,000. And next year, it's no longer $2,000, it goes to $1,000. And it starts to phase out at $110,000, not $400,000. This is already the law. This is what's coming. I was delusional. I thought the president would actually talk about, hey, these are the things I'm willing to support in the tax reform and its extensions. Current status, you get $500 per dependent. It's gone. That's gone. Expiring 2025 tax provisions, and some more stuff that's expiring. Current status, 100% of first year's bonus deduction through 2022. This is what we did a couple weeks, 2 months ago now. It's still sitting in the Senate, where we were just trying to fix some of the bonus depreciation, because it turns out, all right, I'm going to backtrack on myself, but this is important. When you hear some of us come behind the microphone and talk about being able to deduct research and development, you realize that's not a deduction, that's a depreciation. It's a timing effect. You get to take it over 5 or 7 years that you spent all this money developing a new technology, or you can take it today. But you still take it as a deduction. The difference is if you do it over 5 years, you have to finance your cost. And in today's environment, that financing has got much more expensive. Just like expensing, you buy a new piece of equipment so you're more productive, so you can pay your workers more, so you can grow the economy and grow your business. Depreciating that piece of equipment, do you do it on 1 day or 7 years? It's still the same depreciation. The difference is if you do it over 7 years, you have to finance the piece of equipment. If you do it in the first year, you can take it now, and the reinvestment cycle gets dramatically faster. That's why you are seeing productivity shoot up. Is that an expense to the government? I mean, for our tax collections, it's a timing effect. If you do it in the 10-year window, it hits, but if you use a perpetual horizon, it's the same thing. And the economics say you get actually more growth. And please understand, one of the great advocates for doing the expensing was I think this ultra-conservative president, what was his name? Oh yeah, Barack Obama. Part of this was his idea. Just understand the expensing is gone. So now we need to talk about, I'm so glad the president basically said, we're not going to touch Social Security. We're not going to talk about it. In the budget they just dropped, they did actually put out money for the Medicare Trust Fund, but there's nothing there for Social Security. Why am I the only idiot who keeps coming behind these microphones and saying, in 8 or 9 years, we double senior poverty? It's immoral. But is it just immoral for me? I don't understand why our brothers and sisters don't walk around here and understand. We already have lots of data about the number of baby boomers who are ending up homeless right now because they weren't prepared, because they were renters for what was happening in their rent costs. The spike of homeless baby boomers. And in 8, 9 years, Social Security Trust Fund, you get a 25% cut. If you're an average working couple in America, that's $17,400 cut. You double senior poverty. And I did multiple presentations here, but I did a big one 3 weeks ago. I had almost 250,000 views, or at least 200,000+ views on YouTube. So someone cared enough to watch. Now, many of the comments were insane. That basically showed the Democrats' proposal of just raise the cap. It doesn't get you anywhere close to covering the shortfall. Here, I'll do this backwards. The very first year, so this, my math is this is in 2033, but they want me to use 2034 because that's the vetted number. The first year, the shortfall is $616 billion. We know this is coming. Really crappy to talk about when you're out there campaigning because God knows we don't want to tell our voters the actual truth of how hard and how difficult what's coming at us is, but it's math. It's real. Raise the cap on $400,000 and up, and you only cover about a quarter of this. You still double senior poverty. And that's the morality of this place. And look, it's not Republican or Democrat. It's demographics. We got old. We only have a fraction of the workers. We got an update, what was it, on Friday? Was it a week ago Friday? U.S. fertility rates have collapsed again, so we're down to like 1.63. Basically, that math means in 15 years, the United States has more deaths than births. All these things are fixable. And I'm just exhausted. I keep coming behind these microphones seeing if anyone cares. Is it too hard to tell the truth? When I even have some of the what's a nice way to say the Republican industrial establishment fighting like crazy to stop a debt and deficit commission because they're terrified that one of the special interests that finances their group might actually have to step it up? Does anyone actually care about the country? This is the type of crap that takes down a republic. And it's not my feelings. It's not Republican math. It's not Democrat math. It's demographics. It's what we are. And here's the chart I get the most complaints about, and happens to be maybe the one, and it's already out of date. Because we no longer think this number is a $116 trillion deficit in 30 years. We now think it's closer to 130. So it gives you an idea. This chart now is 3 years out of date. 100% of the borrowing from today through the next 30 years. 100% of the borrowing from today through the next 30 years. Interest. Healthcare costs, Medicare. And then if the decision is to backfill Social Security, that's what you get. And it always goes silent. And you always get, David, no one wants to see that board. David, I've actually had a member come up to me angrily in the elevator once saying, you got to stop doing that. I had to actually face a question at one of my town halls about that chart. But it's facts. And once again, a couple weeks ago, because I'm an idiot, I came here and showed the chart that says Social Security, you get, you and your spouse, you and your partner, you get back every dime, plus about a $70,000 spiff. Now, it's a crap rate of return. You would have done so much better if you'd been allowed to take a little sliver and put it in the markets, but that ship sailed 20 years ago. Medicare, for every dime you put in, you're functioning now getting close to getting $5 back. That's the primary driver. We're not supposed to talk about that, but that's the primary driver. And think about what happened. And this is my point I've made for years here. We talk about healthcare as a financing issue, not as a reducing the cost of delivering healthcare. Obamacare, ACA, it was a financing bill. It was who had to pay, who got subsidized. The Republican alternative was a financing bill. It was who got subsidized, who had to pay. Medicare for All is a financing bill. None of these are about what we pay. And I will argue there's an incredible morality out there that could be bipartisan. Taking on obesity, taking on diabetes being 33% of all healthcare spending in this country. What would happen if we could actually make a huge dent in that? It would be the most powerful thing you could do for U.S. sovereign debt. Income inequality, family formation, and just the morality of society. But instead, we don't talk about fixing health. We talk about how we're going to raise taxes to finance more of it. Is this place completely void of the ability to think? So let's get into a couple of these charts that I've only had a little glimpse at because we were building these off the president's budget that was delivered today. And look, you've all seen the press coverage. Oh, the president proposes, the Congress disposes. They're not going to. But that's not the point. What's in there is they give you the latest baselines. They're supposed to be honest about the baselines. And I started with showing the chart and then actually showing that 7 months ago, we're actually now $700 billion more in borrowing, and it keeps, every time they update, it keeps going up. Comparing debt held by the public, projections in CBO's baseline estimate to 2025, budget resolution, from the budget resolution and the 2025 president's budget, we got a math problem. We're basically missing each other's numbers. And if you do it over a decade, understand, the baseline looks like at the end of the decade, we're going to be well over $48 trillion. But that makes sense. If we're clicking off $1 trillion about every 125 days, you really think the credit markets are going to keep loaning us money at favorable interest rates when we're staring down $50 trillion at the end of this decade? Remember, we're supposed to be working on the 2025 budget. Comparing revenue projections in the CBO baseline estimates for the 2025 resolution and the 2025 president's budget, Well, and then you take that and stretch it out over the 10 years, so take it out to 2034. President's FY budget projects $70 trillion in deficit spending through 2034. And look, that's just stunning because, believe it or not, that's like $7 trillion higher than the Congressional Budget Office. Now, we're just now starting to break in. All I can tell you is they have a number on there that's just stunning, and we're trying to figure out where did it come from. How is that possible? So that's $7 trillion higher. That's what it is. And look, we keep going over and over and over, and we're going to do another presentation in a couple of weeks where we'll actually try to make this much more understandable. But the point I'm going at, and when I get through these, I'll try to close on this, Madam Speaker. The President promised us lots and lots of new taxes. No one has begun to do the estimations of what it does to the economy. Yet there was almost no discussion of what we're going to do to make health care actually more affordable. We're going to play the con job of we're just going to raise taxes from one group, put it over to another group, and we're going to pretend that you can shore it up by taxing rich people. Okay, fine. I'm not bleeding for rich people. What I'm bleeding for is the fact that once you use their wealth to shore up the Medicare trust fund, how do you plan to take care of Social Security, which is 3/4 of the problem? So 3 times bigger? But you were willing to talk about the 1/4. But I guess it's called good politics. I'm sure they polled it all before they got there. But you start to looking at the total cumulative receipts. Remember, we don't actually have tax collections. We call them receipts. That's actually the proper term in the tax world. We actually have a mismatching problem where the President's budget basically keeps saying somehow they're going to have $7 trillion more tax receipts than the CBO baseline. So we're going to dig into this and try to understand where does it come from? Because it's not only CBO, it's also the fiscal budget. And somehow there's this magic money that appears over the rest of this decade. All right, 2 more of these. And it always helps if you put it the right side up. Total difference in receipts. And we start to understand they expect substantially higher income taxes. Okay, get ready, gang. Corporate taxes are also higher. Payroll taxes. Now, that's the one that has stayed fairly flat in the way of these new projections, and that's what actually finances our Social Security. That's actually what finances, up till recently, our Medicare Part A. The numbers just don't line up. I'm not going to even make you suffer with that. Madam Speaker, back to the point at hand. In 9 years, maybe 8 years, we double senior poverty. The President said he wants to raise taxes rather dramatically on people with $100 million, because apparently if you have $100 million, you're a billionaire. Which, okay. And that may be enough money to shore up part of the Medicare trust fund. But once again, the vast majority of Medicare spending is general fund spending. That's actually what drives, that's the single biggest driver, that and now interest, of our debt and deficits. But did you all see the stunt like last year and now again this year of, well, you're not allowed to talk about Social Security, so they're willing to double senior poverty. My simple projection is one, this Congress has decided to put the bond market in charge of this government because the first moment the bond market doesn't want our borrowing, because remember, $95,000 a second is what we're borrowing. That's about $9 billion a day is what we're borrowing. We're going to borrow, and understand, we've actually had a couple months so far this year where we had to borrow money to pay the interest. Madam Speaker, I'm going to yield back because I'm bewildered. I'm not sure anyone cares anymore. But these numbers are going to wipe us out, and making crap up to win the next election is immoral. And with that, I yield back.